here to join us to break down some of the prospects that are still on the board. Is the senior producer from NFL Films One, Greg Cosell, sliding in to join us. And first and foremost, Greg, I do want to say I think the biggest surprise for us is some of the talent that is still sitting out there right now. You know, you talk about elite physical traits a lot when we ask you about players. We know Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah has those in plentiful supply, and yet he is still sitting there and probably won't sit there for long today. But what do you think is the rub there? Steve and I were surmising that it might be because there are some coaching staffs that maybe aren't convinced as to what he is or how to use them. Do you think that's the main reason, or is there something else?
Boy, that's such a tough question, Chris, because, you know, you get to specific teams when you get a little later in the first round, and maybe based on needs, maybe based on their particular schemes, they pick someone else. That's hard to know. I mean, ultimately, what we found out is he's not viewed as a transcendent player. He's not viewed as a player you have to have, because if he was viewed as that guy, he would have been drafted. So even though he seems to have a lot of traits, both explosive, dynamic traits, and the ability to cover, which is very important in today's passing NFL, for some reason, he just was not taken off the board. You could be right. It could be a case where people are just not exactly sure what he is within the context of their defense.
And as we look at how the first round shook out, you know, the Bills looking for guys with elite traits, they settle on Greg Rousseau. We have spoken about Greg Rousseau in weeks past when we went over the defensive edge rushers. He came up in our conversation, and at that time we thought he was a little limited, and there's a lot of things we didn't know about him, but the more we heard about what he was like off the field and some of the things he'd been through, it became obvious it was as much about his culture traits as well as his elite physical traits for the Buffalo Bills. He had a very productive 2019 and then opted out, seemed to keep working and put on some weight to get into the draft this year, did not wow people at his pro day, but the production that he put on tape and his physical traits seemed to carry him to the Bills at number 30.
Well, it seems to me that they have a type, and I'm probably extrapolating because I'm not in the meetings, but they have a type of individual they want. Because I think he's probably very much like A.J. Epinesa in terms of the kind of person that he is. And my guess is they'll probably become fast friends. And they're similar players in the sense that they're both big. Probably Rousseau is a higher ceiling athlete, whereas Epinesa probably uses his hands and is more refined at this moment. But Rousseau, you know, it's really interesting. Rousseau, I think you're drafting for what you believe he can become, because he did the majority of his really good work in 2019, guys, on the inside when he was reduced. And when Miami that year was in their sub fronts, they played a lot of three-man fronts. Rousseau was actually a zero technique lining up over the offensive center. And he did a lot of his work working against centers and guards. He has some work to do to really become an edge player. But the athletic traits, look, you can't teach the size. He's a good athlete. He's not an explosive athlete. He's not a bender. He's not a flexible guy. And I think that he needs work on the fact that at times he'll play a little bit too high. And if you play too high, what happens is he gets a little stiff-legged, he gets a little rigid in his lower body, and then he loses the athletic traits that he does have. So there are some things he needs to work on. The other thing you have to remember is he was a wide receiver in high school. So He hasn't played defensive line very much. So he's a work in progress. You know, to use the scouting term, he's a high ceiling guy. If you can get the most out of him, you'll really be happy.
Yeah, you mimicked what Brandon Beane had to say about him. He's a lot like A.J. Epinesa. They're a big, tall guy who they got him down to a more of a fighting weight after they drafted him from 280 down to 255, 260, a little almost too far down. But A.J. Epinesa, kind of the same build. And then, of course, the other guy they've got is Bam Johnson, also a long, high-cut guy, later-round draft pick, but also a very tall guy. The free agents they brought in with Trent Murphy was a 6'4" plus guy as well. And then they just signed F.A. Obata, who is also a big, rangy, tall athlete. So when you say they got a type, you're exactly right. They look for those guys, and then they look for the one of those guys that fits their culture, and they don't hold back. Those are the guys they seem to gravitate to.
Well, a very good friend of mine who worked on the matchup show with me the last 2 years was actually at the University of Miami prior to working with me on the matchup show. And he was part of the recruitment of Rousseau, and he said he's just a special, special kid. And, I think that that's really important to Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, Leslie Frazier, if you're speaking on the defensive side. So I think and the kid's talented. Rousseau's got traits. It's not as if he doesn't have traits. He's got size. He's got outstanding length. He's definitely a plus athlete. He's got great arm extension. His arm length is really, really good. That's a trait. I would say has functional flexibility. He's not a bender, but he's not stiff. He's a speed to power guy. It's like Epinesa. They're speed to power rushers. They're not going to wow you with what we call motorcycle lean, where they get really low to the ground. There are certain types, and they can line up all across your front. And obviously that's an important element as well.
So let's jump into some of these guys that are still on the board that Steve and I think could possibly be fits for the Bills. And I'll start with a center that I actually thought was kind of a wild card possibility at the bottom of round one, but Creed Humphrey, the 3-year starter at Oklahoma, this is a country-strong kid. I mean, his core strength is unbelievable. He doesn't even when he doesn't get the perfect rep or set, Greg, I mean, he still somehow wins and get himself back in position to stay between the rusher and the quarterback. It's unbelievable.
You know what, Chris? I'm not going to sit here and say I'm Mr. Offensive Line Guru, but, I've been doing this for quite a few years, and I've learned a lot. I was hard-pressed to find plays where he made a mistake. I mean, this kid is just really a good center prospect. He's poised, he's aware. His execution efficiency to me was off the charts. The only thing I could say is, and again, these are things that different teams have different views on. He's got very short arms for his height and his overall size. That might mean something to some teams. I think that he's more of a strength and leverage guy in terms of his technique and his hand usage. I think he just knows how to use his hands, and that makes him play really strong. He wasn't asked at Oklahoma to play with a lot of movement and range, so he was kind of a phone booth confined space offensive center. Now, those are just things I noticed watching a lot of his tape. But overall, this guy plays with unbelievable balance and body control. I'd be hard-pressed to count on one hand the number of times he was on the ground. He's just a really solid prospect who is so execution efficient.
Yeah, and I would agree with you. And that's kind of, I'm leaning towards offensive line or maybe cornerback at the bottom of of number 2 of the round. And Tyson Campbell was, Brownie thought he might go a little bit higher than he did. I thought Tyson Campbell, along with his running mate Stokes, might both go a little earlier than they have. But what are your thoughts about a cornerback, Tyson Campbell?
Yeah, I think the issue with Campbell is his ball production. He did not seem to have a feel for the thrown ball. But other than that, he's a high-level traits guy. I mean, he played corner in high school at American Heritage with Patrick Surtain, and there were schools that had Campbell rated as the better recruit. So you're talking about a kid who's long at 6'1". He can run, not quite as much as Stokes, but he can run. I thought that he played mirror match press man really well. There are some who believe as well that in zone that he doesn't quite see the route concepts as well as he ultimately needs to. So I would say the two reasons why, given his physical and athletic traits, Steve, that he's not a pure first-round pick, because we know he's not, is the ball production and the feeling that maybe in zone he just is not quite as aware and disciplined as you need to be. But he's got tremendous traits to play on the outside.
I heard another guy that kind of evaluates these prospects. I can't remember who it was for the life of me. They said one of his main issues in man is just not being able to get his head around in time to
Yep.
make more plays on the ball. The question
Yep.
to you, Greg, is that a very coachable technique, though?
I've heard both ways from people I've spoken to over the years. I've heard, who was I speaking to years ago? Might have been Gil Bird. You remember him?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
His son played here.
Yeah. Who believed that that's not something I think it was him. I don't want to assign something to him that he didn't say, so maybe I'm wrong. But the point I'm trying to make is some believe that if you just don't have, if you're not a ball production guy, it's very hard to teach that it's an instinct more than a coaching technique. Others believe you can coach it. So I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a DB coach, but you hit it right on the head. That's one of the main issues with Campbell is he's really good in press man. He locks right onto receivers, gets in their hip pocket, but he doesn't find the football. He doesn't locate the football. And, you know, that's seen as a negative. When you're going through your strengths and weaknesses and evaluating tape, that's in your negative box.
Let's talk about another defensive back, a corner, Aaron Robinson out of University of Central Florida. What are your thoughts on him and what his availability might be at number 61?
Yeah, I love this kid. I loved watching his tape. I mean, he is a high-level competitor. I mean, he's so much fun to watch. He plays with intensity. He's aggressive. He embraced the contact nature of the game. He played both outside and in the slot, probably more snaps in the slot. I think more people will see him as a slot corner, just given that he's 5'11 and a half and 186. But I guess you could play him on the outside, depending on how you see him. I mean, look, it comes Asante Samuel's in a similar situation. He's 5'10", 180. So it depends on those guys who are smaller are in the eye of the beholder. But this kid is willing and tough. He'll play the run. There's a lot of 11 personnel in this league, obviously. So you play with a slot corner. Now, I think the Bills have a very good slot corner. So I don't know. Maybe they see him as an outside corner. He can play. We saw him on the outside play mirror match press man and physical press man. He likes to be a physical player. So I think you're dealing with a guy that has extensive experience both outside and in the slot. And then it just depends on how you see him within the context of your defense and the personnel you have.
Yeah, and it's funny, you use the word intensity. It's the same word I wrote down when I watched a couple of his games. I mean, I don't watch as much as you do.
Chris, this kid's fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, he's juiced up to play. Like, you can just see it on film. Like, he's every single snap. And just so some of our listeners know, this was a kid that was recruited to Alabama before he ended up at Central Florida. So
that is correct. He transferred from Alabama.
Yeah. So you got a school like that coming after you. You know you have traits that are high end.
No, you're a big time recruit then. But the term I use for players like that, with the way he plays, is playing personality. He's got an outstanding playing personality.
Yeah. Let's go from one corner to another. One right down the thruway from us in Ifeatu Melifonwu. We know that his older brother was drafted into the league. I believe he was a second-round pick. I still remember seeing him at the Senior Bowl out of UConn.
Yeah, I thought he'd make it, too. I was wrong on him.
Yeah, he was a safety. He had elite physical traits, but his instincts were the problem in terms of, getting on the field with regularity. Where do you feel like teams are going to come down on Melifonwu with respect to the instincts? Because a lot of the same physical traits are there.
Yeah, the physical traits are clearly there. I mean, you're talking about a size, speed, plus athleticism, competitiveness profile. That's there. I think he's got some limitations, though, Chris. I think that he's not really fluid. I think he's got a little bit of core stiffness. So while he's got the measurables that you like, I think just in terms of actually playing the position where you need to flip your hips and you need to, transition with your body, I'm not sure. But the reality is this: big corners who can run and play press man are always in demand. And I think his baseline athletic parameters and style of play fit that. But I think he's more of a press man corner, to me anyway, than an off coverage zone corner. So, again, that's the way I see him.
Coming into this draft, we knew that the interior defensive line group was a little bit shallow, to say the least. But the Bills, looking at their roster and the way they're constructed, if they want to look down the road, maybe get somebody who's a project on the defensive line, interior defensive tackle, they may look to a guy at this point of the draft. Let's talk about a couple of defensive tackles. Davion Nixon from Iowa. What do you see?
Yeah, he's fascinating because he's 313 pounds. He's a great athlete. He plays D tackle like a running back. He doesn't play D tackle with a whole lot of physicality. He plays it more to move around. So the question is, can you get him to be more physical within the context of your scheme? But this guy he's the kind of natural athleticism and quickness that you can't really teach. So he kind of looks like a pure 3 technique. He did play multiple D tackle positions at Iowa. He's a gap penetrator. He's a movement D tackle if you slant a lot, if you have stunt schemes. But there was almost no physicality and power to his game. And I would say, watching the tape, not a whole lot of commitment to wanting to play that way. But my guess is he'll find a place in the league, since there's not many 313-pound defensive tackles that move the way he does. So the question is, can he become a more physical player, or is it just in his DNA the way he plays?
The guy that I like, and I know it's a thin defensive tackle class, Greg, but Alim McNeill, you were just talking about how Davion Nixon plays like a running back. This guy was a running back before.
I know.
In high school, before he put on a ton of weight, and he's intriguing to me. Like, the athleticism he has, even though he's shaped like a round, he looks like Charles Barkley out there playing defensive tackle.
He was a baseball player too, believe it or not, in high school. I think he'll be fascinating because the way he was used at North Carolina State, Chris, is he lined up basically as what we call a 0 technique, head up on the center. So when you line up like that, you in a sense 2 gap. You have to fight the offensive center. You've got to engage him, you've got to control him, then you've got to displace him. That's what 2 gap means, and that's what he did predominantly at North Carolina State. I personally think he's got the physical and athletic traits to be a 1 gap player. I think this guy could easily be a 3 technique defensive tackle. To me, I watched him, and the guy that came to my mind just in terms of the way he's built, because he's short in terms of height, I kind of thought of Grady Jarrett of the Atlanta Falcons, who's a really good 3 technique. I think McNeill can become that guy with coaching and experience, and I was really intrigued by him, Chris.
What about the 1 tech? I mean, he was like one of the most fun guys I got to watch.
He could probably do that too. I mean, he weighs 317.
Okay.
He's 6'2", 317. He could probably do that as well. My point is, I think you could make him a gap penetrator, a gap player, a 1 gap player, and he'd be fine. I think he has the overall traits to do that.
Yeah, I don't watch nearly as many players as you do, Greg, but when I watched him, he's like one of these guys that, after you've watched about 10, 15 guys in a row, you kind of, you're drifting a little bit. This guy makes you sit back up in your chair.
Yeah. No, this guy was a lot of fun to watch. See, there's a perfect example when people talk about production. This guy didn't make a lot of tackles, but you got to watch the tape, so you got to see him play every snap, because he didn't have a lot of, if you just looked at a stat sheet, you'd go, this guy's not very good. But that's not true at all when you put the tape on.
Last one from me, Greg. I want to talk to you about offensive tackle out of Texas, Samuel Cosme. We've been talking about offensive line a lot, and obviously defensive tight end, corner. We went into the top 3 needs or positions we thought were corner, edge rusher, and offensive line. Let's end it with Sam Cosme.
Yeah, I mean, he might fit, because to me, he was much more of a finesse offensive tackle than a power player. He's got really good athleticism. He's tall, he's long, good arm length. He's got good movement. I think he probably needs to get a little stronger, but you can make guys stronger in an NFL weight room. You can't make them more athletic for the most part. I think he needs to be taught a few things regarding a vertical pass set, which you do see the Bills use a lot of because they want to push the ball down the field. But I think he's got tools and traits to work with. I think he's a really solid prospect. I'm not surprised he didn't go in the first round, because I think there's some work to be done. But you're dealing with a guy. Look, everybody would love to have a guy that has length and sweet feet at left tackle. He kind of approaches that. He's kind of that guy. So, to me, he's a really fascinating prospect. And my guess is he'll come off the board tonight before we get to pick 60.
So just so fans are clear on what you're saying with the vertical pass set, you're talking about a kick slide here, and more often he just
Right.
kind of turns his hips and hinges, right?
Well, there's kind of, I mean, again, this probably requires more time than we have. And I was taught this by my good buddy, Jeff Schwartz. You know, there's really three kinds of pass sets. There's the short set, which is on quick drops. There's kind of what they call a 45-degree angle set. And then there's a vertical set on deeper drops where, for the most part, you keep your inside leg square for 2 steps as you kick slide. And then you have to turn a little bit. You don't want to turn square to the sideline, but you have to turn a little bit because if it's a true edge rusher, if it's a guy who's outside of you, he's trying to beat you to the edge. So you've got to turn your body a little bit. But yeah, that's what's called a vertical. That's what would be called a vertical set.
Greg, thanks as always for the insight here. We got 2 rounds tonight. Enjoy it. I know you'll be paying very close attention.
Probably. I imagine I will be doing that. Yes.
Thanks, Greg.
Enjoy it. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, guys.